What's up, friends? So today we're going to be discussing a new 2021 film called Nobody. So Nobody is a film with a runtime of about an hour 32 minutes, and it's directed by Ilya Naishuller. This film stars Bob Odenkirk, who's the main character Hutch, as well as Connie Nielsen, who plays the role of Becca, Hutch's wife, and RZA, one of my favorite rappers, but also a relatively good actor who plays the role of Harry. There's also a couple of other characters who are standouts, specifically Hutch's dad, who also does a fantastic job. So Nobody is a film that follows the life of Hutch, doing the same thing day in and day out. Honestly, like everybody, in terms that he has a very normal life. He has a wife, he has 2 kids, and it's a very generic household. His life becomes a rinse and repeat, essentially. So Hutch is stuck in this rut, in this situation where he really feels undermined by the world. One day though, he's on escalates, however, when it turns out one of the gang members is a younger brother of a very powerful Russian mafia mob boss who is now out for revenge against Hutch. And that's essentially the plot of this film. It's very straightforward, very easy to understand. So in terms of genres, I would characterize this film as a action thriller. There's a little bit of comedy thrown in, and it's very much a survival aspect, especially once the mob boss starts coming after Hutch and his family. But essentially, the film focuses on action and thrills first, and it does a very solid job at doing that. So in terms of critic reviews, the film had relatively good reception upon launch. On Rotten Tomatoes, it has an 84%. On IMDb, it has a 7.4 out of 10. And then for Google general audience reviews, it has a 93% liked. And I would consider myself as one of the 93. So in reference to the characters, the movie really has a focus on Hutch himself, in addition to a couple other characters, but mainly the focus lies on Hutch and his transformation / reawakening of his skills and his abilities and his confidence, essentially. So the film really focuses on Hutch as a character and his development. So in that sense, Hutch is very three-dimensional. Unfortunately, all the other characters, the mob boss, Hutch's wife, his kids, everybody else kind of becomes a side character, and nobody really has very much background, very much three-dimensionality. There's not really too much to any character except for Hutch. So don't go into this film expecting any sort of character piece, any sort of really well-developed plot or character development. It's all mainly focused on Hutch, and so if you fall in love with him and his personality and who he is, you're gonna enjoy the film for sure. But if you don't like Hutch at the beginning, if you don't like the idea of Hutch whatsoever, then you probably aren't gonna like this film because no other characters are really well developed. The movie does a fantastic job of developing Hutch as a character and making you, the viewer, fall in love with him, because you see him take L after L after L, and that really makes you feel remorseful and sad for him because of how unfortunate his life has become. Even though I would characterize that a lot of lives are like that, and I would characterize that majority of lives are like that. And there is a little anecdote told a little bit later in the film about a character Hutch knew in the past that helps shed a little bit light on the situation and how it can be viewed in one of 2 ways. But I'm not going to spoil that for you because it is a relatively cool addition to the film. But essentially, you feel bad for Hutch because of what he's going through and how you can tell how unhappy he is with the situation. So when things escalate and you start to see Hutch for who he really is, for all of his hidden talents and his skills, you feel proud for him and you want him to keep succeeding. You want him to be badass, and he is. I promise you that. So in terms of if it holds your attention or not, I would say most definitely does. If you're a fan of action films, especially really well developed choreography and insane high intensity action with a ton of gunfire, a ton of violence, creative kills, stuff like that, you're gonna love this film because action's sparse through it very consistently. If the scene isn't focused on a little bit of character development, there's action going on. It's pretty much a full-on thrill ride. So in terms of that, it's gonna hold your attention. Now, if you don't like action films, I would not recommend this film whatsoever, because like I said before, there's not really too much in here except for action and awesome action. So if that doesn't appeal to you at all, then this might not be the film for you. Now, if action does intrigue you, I promise you, you will be delighted by this film because the action is spicy. Going into this film, expect a very straightforward plot, very predictable, obvious. You know what's gonna happen, you know how things are gonna unfold, and the movie doesn't really care that you know. The movie isn't here to throw a twist on you, to make you think. The movie's here for you to unwind, sit back, and just watch chaos occur. In terms of what's unique about this film, as I mentioned before, it's super engaging if you love the action and violence. I would say if you like the film John Wick, you're gonna love this film. Because John Wick, his fighting style and his choreography is replicated a bit in this film. And again, it's the same producers, I believe, who made both of the John Wick and Nobody films. So you can definitely see a little bit of that John Wick essence and vibe in this film for sure. It's baked into it, and in my opinion, it helps make the film a little bit better because he's essentially a John Wick too. Again, the kills are stylistic. Don't expect realism. If you go in here with a strong knowledge about guns and explosives and how things work, you might not like this film because some of the things that happen aren't fully realistic. But again, if you're going in just to sit back, relax, and just watch carnage occur and watch bad guys get shredded, then you're gonna love this film because there's plenty of that. In terms of who would like this film, if you're fans of high action violence, high action revenge films, if you're fans of traditional good guy films, one-man army films, films where it's essentially one versus a ton, and that one guy has a lot of skill and power and potential. In terms of similar film, as I mentioned before, it's very, very similar to John Wick. So again, if you like John Wick, you gotta watch this film because it's very similar. John Wick has a little bit more of a well-developed world and backstory and situation, but Nobody is still a very interesting film, and although the backstory isn't as developed, the main character is well developed, and the main character is just as alluring as John Wick is, although, you know, Keanu Reeves will always be king. Also, I would say if you liked the Punisher show or the Punisher films, so all in all, I would highly recommend Nobody if you love John Wick, if you love One Man Army, insane action films, films with extremely well done choreography, and films that are very engaging to watch visually, that may not have too much structure in the back end, but are very engaging visually, then you're gonna love this film and I highly recommend it. I gave this film a 3 out of 4, as in worth checking out, worth watching if you have the time. And I recommend paying attention because it's totally worth it if you love action films. Now I'll be moving on to the Parent's Guide, where I'll detail a little bit of the content in this film so you can decide if you want to show it to your kids or if you want to watch it with your parents, and so on and so forth. So Nobody is rated R, and that's mainly for violence and language. So in terms of violence, I give this film a 5 out of 5. So again, as I mentioned before, this film is very much focused on action and violence, and in that sense, there is a lot of it. There's a lot of brutal hand-to-hand combat. Very similar to John Wick in that the punches are seen, blood is frequent, knives are used, very visceral, a lot of violence and gore of bad guys. There's also a scene where a man is slit a little bit to make a hole, to use a straw as a breathing apparatus for him to survive. That scene's a little bit graphic. There's also other scenes where there's a lot of bullet wounds, a lot of gun violence, a lot of bullet wounds, a lot of blood sprays. Violence is a very heavy aspect of this film, and it's very flashy. It's frequent, and as I mentioned before, very creative kills, but they can be pretty gory. So I would not recommend this for younger audiences who haven't had a chance to deal with violence and learn about what exactly the value of a human life, because that's not really showcased in this film. In terms of sexual content, I give this film a 1 out of 5. There's really very limited amount, almost none. There's one conversation where a couple discusses the idea that they haven't had sex in a while. It's very brief and no actual sexual scenes or sexuality is shown. and there's no nudity or nothing like that. So in that sense, it's a relatively brief part. There's also a blackmail scene where a character is shown images of himself in compromising positions in photographs that essentially he wouldn't want posted, and it's used as blackmail. Although the scene is brief, it is a little bit graphic and it flashes on the screen and everything's relatively clearly visible. It's not nudity, but they're BDSM scenes, so it is a little bit graphic for younger audiences. And then finally, in terms of language, I would give this film a 4.5. There's a lot of language in this film, a lot of F words, about 38 F words to be precise. So not too many, that's why I gave it a 4 instead of a 5. But again, it is frequent, it is there. There's a lot of other swearing as well, so expect language. So all in all, I would say this is definitely not a film for youth. The amount of violence and language in this film, it's just not appropriate for a younger audience. But if they can handle those two, there's not very much sexual content, so in that sense, you know, it's up to you what you decide, but I personally would not recommend this for youth. So now we'll be moving on to a little bit about some key insights or takeaways from the film that are pretty interesting to think about. So first, there's a quote from this film that's I found very powerful and I think is very realistic. And the quote essentially says, "God doesn't close one door without opening another." Now, this can be taken in a variety of ways and has a ton of applications, but essentially what it means is you're going to go through a lot of difficulties. You're going to go through a lot of situations where you lose something, whether it be a relationship where you break up, whether it be a job where you get fired. You know, there's a lot of situations where a door might close for you, right? And that's just natural. That's a way of life. So what this quote is essentially saying is, even though it may seem like, oh, it's such a dark time because my relationship broke or my job is gone, you know, whatever it may be, it always has not necessarily a positive light, but it has some sort of, there is some aspect of positivity that can be taken from there. There is some aspect of, you need to be aware that just because the door is closed behind you doesn't mean it's done, doesn't mean it's game over. It just means now doors are open. You know, if a relationship ends, that just means you're back on the market and there's a whole world out there for you to explore, for people to meet, you know, new relationships to start. Same with the job. If you get fired from a job, that does not mean the end of the world. That just means it's time to buckle up, you know, start applying and get back on the job market and find a new job to invest in. And in that sense, the film does a great job of showcasing a little bit of the idea of, like, you know, just because the door closes behind you, just because something ends, just because something goes bad, doesn't mean you should give up. And instead, you should be propelled to work harder, work faster, work smarter, and open that next door and explore. The film also does a great job of showcasing the idea of don't underestimate a nobody, especially someone who has nothing to lose, essentially, right? So Hutch is in a position where he's so fed up with life, so down in the dumps, that he is willing to go to extremes at a flip of a switch. You know, you gotta have the idea that don't underestimate anybody around you. Just respect everybody with the same love. Don't be vile, and you'll get the same amount of respect back, and life will be good. So there's a couple of the key takeaways and lessons from this film. But other than that, let me know in the comments below if you watch Nobody, if you plan to watch Nobody, what you thought about it. Let me know if there's anything in this review you disagree with, or if there's any way I can make these reviews better for you guys. And all in all, thank you so much for checking it out, and I'll catch you all later.